Kia ora tātou katoa. Ko te mihi tuatahi ki ngā mana whenua o tēnei rohe, ngā tirangi nui, ngā te rangi, ngā pōtiki, ngā te pūkenga, tēnā rā koutou. Ki ngā maunga, ki ngā awa, ki te moana, e takoto nei ki waho, tēnā koutou. Ki ngā kaumātua, i whakatūwheratia i tēnei hui, tēnei ata, tēnā koutou. Kia koutou, ngā manuhiri, ngā kaimahi, i roto i nei kaupapa katoa, tēnā rā koutou katoa. Ko whare pūhunga te maunga, ko waikato te awa, ko tainui te waka, ko raukawa te iwi, ko Ngāti Huri te hapū, ko Pikitu te marae. Nō Putarurua hau, ko Hannah Simmonds tōku ingoa. My name is Hannah. I come from the centre of the universe, just over the hills, called Putaruru. I know you know where it is. It's on State Highway 1, so. I have lived in Whakatāne for 18 years though, and met my very handsome Ngāti Awa tāne many years ago, and we have 3 beautiful tamariki, some of which are up there. All of them. Yes, all of them. My background is in education, as you heard, and I worked for a number of years as a chemistry teacher. I know. Blowing stuff up was very fun. And more recently moved into professional development for schools and teachers around the country. And in that journey, my passion for equity was sharpened. So I'm really passionate about ensuring that my tamariki, my 3 beautiful tamariki, have more opportunities to flourish. We heard that word this morning. To reach mauri ora, to reach their potential in whatever space they choose to walk in. So Erin's going to talk a little bit about Te Puna Taiao when she jumps on the mic here, but that's a little tiny bit about me. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou. I tipi mai ahau I Pio'opio. I nāianei, ko Whakatāne take wā kāinga noho, I te tāne o Tokuhua tānei a Shea. Toko whā o maua tamariki a tāhua, ko Quinn rātou, ko Cole, ko Louisa, ko Arlo. Ko Ngāti Tahu, Ngāti Whāua, te iwi o Tokuhua tānei, aku tamariki hoki, ko Erin Green tōku ingoa. Kia ora anō. Yes, so like Hannah said, that's her kids up there and my 4 children I introduced to you. So my background a little bit, Dylan talked about, but science base, was a practicing marine scientist for a little while for the Department of Conservation, working on our endemic Hector's dolphin around the bottom of the South Island, and then worked on for government and several central policy roles, looking at marine protection and conservation, as well as social policies like migrant and refugee resettlement. So I'm really interested, always have been, in the interaction between people and environment, and I guess that Māori worldview has always informed my thinking on things, and our thinking on Te Puna Taiao. So we've heard a little bit on this already today, but the contemporary context of Aotearoa New Zealand. We do well on international standards comparatively, but we know there's a big sector of our community who are not achieving the same outcomes. So very inequitable outcomes on a lot of these things, which I won't go into because everybody knows about all these things and why we're here today from a public health point of view. So the genesis of what we're here to talk about today came about when, so like I said, we live in Whakatāne. This is my youngest child, who's now a little bit bigger than that. But when our second of 4 children started school in Allendale Primary School in Whakatāne, and he went from this beautiful early childhood environment where there was trees and lots of outdoor spaces. The focus was on outdoor teaching, really good practice, one-on-one practice with kids, lots of learning through play, and there's a chance to experiment. And he got to school, and this here photo is the courtyard outside his classroom. So those steps with the yellow paint on them are the steps into his classroom. He was quite whakama, he wasn't going to go anywhere, so that was his radius, that little area there of concrete. And we could see the school trying really hard to take on board all the good practices from ECE, which are being pulled into primary schools now, about learning through play and the importance of resilience and building social skills and building oral language in order to do well in education. And then this was being this environment that they were had to do it in. So this is the whole junior courtyard for the whole junior school, right? So there's not that grass, but the green you can see is astroturf, not grass. So we were actively looking for something that we could be doing differently in our communities from a grassroots level to make a difference. And we were like, aha, this has got it. We were sick of hearing on and reading and being informed about all the researchers coming out on these various topics and seeing very few grassroots solutions to these things. So that was the genesis of the project.
Yeah, so there's been lots of kōrero today about connection and the relationship between mana whenua, mana tangata, around our innate sense of connection to the environment. And I guess for us, when we saw this potential opportunity in our kids' schools, we turned to mātauranga Māori first. And it was mentioned previously by a number of speakers around our oral traditions and our old wisdom. And we heard Bruce talk about mātauranga. I just want to share this really interesting kōrero. And I know lots of people in their slides have had all these quotes by these fancy people who I imagine have lots of degrees, but my quotes come from kaumātua and people that I respect in Te Ao Māori. And I had a conversation with a colleague and they were talking about this word mātauranga Māori. And an older kaumātua was talking to one of my colleagues and said, mātauranga Māori didn't exist pre-colonisation. We didn't need the word mātauranga Māori. Why are we using it now? And the response was, I bet you a fish doesn't have a word for water either. Only when it's under threat. So the word mātauranga we've had to coin because our knowledges and practices and wisdom is under threat. Not just under threat, it's been minimised. So, therefore, we go, where lies the wisdom? Mātauranga Māori. So when we saw this opportunity, we thought, let's turn to mātauranga Māori. What does it tell us? And mātauranga Māori tells us whakapapa is what connects us to the whenua. And you would have heard Eugene and myself and others start with the maunga, the awa. That is where we descend from. So mātauranga Māori, in there lies some solutions for us, we thought. As well as all the rich evidence scientifically that has already been presented this morning. Another example of how mātauranga Māori is really important in our understanding of our connectedness to nature, to Te Taiao. Again, Bruce had kahikatea, and the kahikatea is a really interesting tree. Now, remind yourself, I'm a chemist, so don't take everything I say with a grain of truth, biologically. But if you have one growing by itself, what happens to it? It's going to fall over. You need lots of them growing together because their roots intertwine. And so whakatauki and mātauranga Māori tell us this already. We don't need the science. The stories and the waiata and the whakatauki tell us that actually to thrive we have to grow together. We have to connect to each other. So that's kind of some of the context from which our ideas in this kaupapa came from. The other thing that has kind of been touched on is around public spaces. And for us, particularly with our kids being at school and for me being a teacher, we realised that one of the most influential places that we can implement some change are schools. For a number of reasons. Firstly, they hold quite a lot of land in a town. Yeah. Secondly, that is the age at which our tamariki are most susceptible to new ideas, are most influential, or the place that we can have the most impact on their life course is when they're at primary school. So we thought to ourselves, based on our kind of kōrero and discussions and some mātauranga from other people and science, what might we be able to do to address some of these issues? And we thought, how about if we changed schools, the way they look? And I think it was Neil, you had a picture of a room in a hospital that looked very sterile. Most of our schools still look the same as they did 150 years ago. So what would happen if we changed those into spaces that help reconnect ourselves to Te Taiao? So we hypothesised, as scientists do, and we thought that these might be some of the benefits we might see, based on the science, but also based on what we know about, for me, how Māori kids learn best, how they make sense of who they are, their identity, their connection to each other, in order to then connect with the wider world around them. So these are some of the things that we expect to see if we make some changes in our outdoor spaces.
Keep going. You're really good at this bit.
Okay, right, I'll do this. So, with that in mind, we had a lot of thinking, a lot of talking, a lot of discussing, a lot of research, and we came up with 10 design elements that we believe are integral to creating an outdoor space that can transform outcomes for our tamariki, not just our tamariki, our wider communities. Okay, because if schools have a lot of land in a town, we want the community to be engaging with those spaces as well. From an education perspective, we know that when whānau are engaged with their tamariki's learning, tamariki outcomes are higher. So the 10 design elements, and you'll see some examples of what this looks like in a little bit, are those things there. What I want to point out, I think, is the important difference from some of the other kōrero we've heard this morning, today, is the cultural element. So yes, diverse spaces, yes, gardens, yes, challenging art and sculpture, loose parts, sensory, we've heard some of those things already, but critical for us, and the point of difference to some of the international movements, are references to te ao Māori, acknowledgement of mana whenua and the importance of that, spaces where that rich mātauranga ā-iwi can actually be given life. So that when I walk into a school in Whakatane, I know I'm in Whakatane. I know ngā te awa stories are being reflected here. Because at the moment, a lot of the schools I've walked in my professional development career, I could have been in any country in the world. So how do we know, how do our tamariki know that who they are is reflected and where they're living is reflected? So those are some of the key differences that we see in this particular kaupapa.
Thanks, Anna. So once we came up with this kaupapa, which we did, like Anna said, drawing on the influences in our lives and each other, we sort of tapped in and we have grown and learnt about more movements that are going on in sort of similar fields. So that's how we've connected with Neil in this Biophilic movement, because they're related. There's international movement to use schools as places to introduce biodiversity. But again, like Hannah said, that don't include the cultural element, because there's a world acknowledgement that schools are one of the largest landowners in the world. So I know in Paris, for example, they're converting all the schools into parks that have indigenous flora and fauna. And so this here, semicircle here is from the Ministry of Education. So they too acknowledge that school grounds have a place in learning for children. And so we're just tapping into all the broader movements in this space as well over the last couple of years since we first developed this kaupapa. So what do we do now? So we have formally set up as a charitable trust. So we are just here and doing this largely around other things that we do and of our own time. So looking at trying to make ourselves sustainable into the future, but a lot of our work has been voluntary. And I guess the big thing we looked at when we found this is not only are schools not doing this, so that there's an opportunity to do it, but the funding framework isn't there if schools want to do it, right? So schools look like they have for 150 years, and if they want to change, so if people get into this, if people take on the idea of biophilic places, and if they take on the idea of what we're advocating for, which is biophilic spaces that include cultural elements, then schools, our board of trustees are left to fund the outdoor spaces in schools, right? So the Ministry of Education funds the buildings, the car parks, the pathways, but outdoors on the school grounds are not actually considered learning environments, so they are not funded. So that's left to the boards of trustees and individual schools to fund playgrounds and any sort of enrichment to their grounds. So if schools get onto this idea and actually start doing this, of course the schools who have more wealthy cohorts are going to be able to tap into this, and schools who are in low decile areas whose whānau do not have the resources to commit to improvements are going to be left behind. So it's another potential driver of inequity, and this is a government-funded driver of inequity that's existing. So this is the second school, this is the design for the second school that we're intensively supporting to implement Te Puna Taiao, which is Kamiora Community School in Flaxmere in Hastings. So that's the design of its new buildings, which are being built starting in a couple of months for $6.5 million, a school for about 130 children at this stage. The outdoor spaces, nothing. So they're prepared to spend $6.5 million on the new building, and they're talking about maybe having 50 grand to put towards the outdoor spaces, but that's not confirmed. So you can see the potential for this to keep driving home inequities, to keep those differences in outcomes for kids. So as well as advocating for that policy to be different, we are intensively supporting specific schools to implement the Te Puna Taiao kaupapa. So we have divided our work into three stages. So the first stage is reimagining what it could be. So that, to us, process is really important. So one of our values is ako, so that continual learning and sharing of ideas. So the process of getting the whole community behind what the school could be. So that's looking back to its history of the whenua there, talking with mana whenua about what the school could incorporate, and coming up with something that's beautiful. So then the second part, and which is by far the trickiest part, is the transformation. It's the trickiest part because there is no money to do it. So we've had to we're looking to community funders to try and make these transformations happen. So what we're saying is we're not creating just a space for the school kids to use, we're creating a space for the whole community. So on the whole argument, it takes the village to raise a child, well, you need a place where you can raise that child, where you can come together to collectively raise children. Schools are the obvious solution of coming up with a place for this. So this is the tricky part, this is the part doing funding applications and trying to convince people that this is a worthy thing to do. Then the final part is actually pretty tricky too, because as well as advocating for transformed space, we are advocating for transformed practice in relation to that transformed space. So we'll talk a little bit more about results down the line, but some of the baseline information we've collected at Allendale School, where we've transformed so far, where my children go, the amount of time teachers spend each week outside with their children on average is 2 hours of contact time. So the practice is to teach indoors, the classroom is, so what we want to see now is, with this beautiful new environment, can we pull that teaching outdoors and get the teachers to actually do some of the teaching outdoors, not just to use the spaces as play spaces. So that's the challenge that we're embarking upon now. So I was just going to run you now through some of the before and after images, so you can see what sort of stuff, and I mean, what we've done and what Hannah's talked through as an initiative is really flexible. So we've talked through those 10 design elements, but actually there's no prescriptive way about how they should be applied. So each school should and will look totally different. So this is some ideas about what Te Kura o Motueka, Allendale School, looks like in Whakatane, but any school will be different. So this area, and this started the project, because when I went to this school with that idea, and we said, oh, we've come up with this kaupapa, we think it would work brilliant in here. We said that place in particular would make a beautiful community garden. You know, it's right next to the road, so it would have good disability access for a lot of our older people in mobility scooters. We've got a lot of disabled people in our community. It would be a really accessible place for a community garden that was shared between the school. They said it's earmarked for a car park. And I was like, oh, rats. So that's where we went head to head. Sorry to Ministry of Education employees, but said, so that was $249,000 was allocated to a car park, and we said we would like to we're trying to encourage whānau to walk and bike more and to get there themselves under their own steam, so can we transfer that money to this outdoor project? No, that's not a priority for the school. Oh, 5 minutes on, go. I better go faster. Okay, all right. So I'll just run you through the transformation images. So that's a community garden. This is a pātaka kai, which these are popping up all over the country, but this has been wildly successful. Every day it is full in the morning, and every day it is cleared within a couple of hours. So anyone is free to contribute food, free to take food. So the community events that are being held there are quite amazing. Abraham said he drove past the other night and there were people at 10:30, whānau of all ages, still there having a good time. So that's the court area before, which is pretty grim and drab. The one child there you can see of that photo is the teacher's child, who was the only kids who used the school after hours. This is what it looks like now. So skate park, it's just a hive of activity. Lots of kids are using it after school who would otherwise be home doing Fortnite probably, but they're there. They're there on their own, having a good time with their friends, making social connections, moving, being outside, being active. So,
while Erin's just flicking through there, I might just touch on a couple of things that we also think is really important about this type of approach. And there's been a lot of talk about cities and people and science, and a couple of mentions, but we think it's critically important about our rangatahi, about our tamariki being grown as the future kaitiaki for our whenua. So I think that's why this is also particularly important, because we can start to instill some of those values with our tamariki so that they can be the leaders and the shakers and movers for our biophilic cities in the future.
Thanks, Hannah. So this is just quickly. So Kimiora Community School, their pedagogy is great. So those kids are outside 90% of the day. Hawke's Bay climate like Whakatane, they can be outside all the time. This is their spaces at the moment. It's fenced, it's grim, it looks like a prison. This is their community, and so there's a whole lot of things happening in Pāhara Keke at the moment, which we're sort of which is great because we've got some momentum. So we've had a great community consultation, really good engagement with the community there, and this is the new plans for the, so there's a pā site, there's a Tane's forest, there's a Tangaroa playground. It's beautiful. We've worked with very cool designers that have come up with, really listen to what the community wants, and it's a really, because the school is 60% Tongan mostly, and lots of other Pasifika and Māori, it's really trying to reflect all those cultures. Don't really have time, do we?
No. So I think, if you'd like to find out more a little bit about how we're evaluating this and we want to see some of the outcomes, then please come and talk to us this afternoon. One of the important things for us, again, just touching on some of the things that have been said, is the reciprocal nature of our relationship with the environment. That actually, yes, we want to benefit from it, but actually, how do we benefit Papatuanuku, Ranginui, Tāne Mahuta, Tangaroa? So that reciprocity is really important for us. So I think that's just a reminder around the relationship between mana whenua and mana tangata, is it's a reciprocal one.
And I wonder as well, just thinking back to your comment, Eugene, about the more recent disconnect of tamariki Māori from the environment, that actually the implications might be more profound as well. So might be having more of a contribution to those inequities, so that if we can redress that now, and all the science says that there is that window of opportunity to connect kids to the natural world, and that's pre-7. So we've got this opportunity to do it, and if we get them having a love for the natural world by making their schools the most beautiful places in their lives, then they will go on to be a next generation of kaitiaki who are doing a better job than our generation has, hopefully. Yeah, and shout out to Tui Te Ora for their support with evaluation. We really do appreciate that.
I imagine that we've probably run out of time by now, so if you want to find out anything else, please visit our website, I'm not kidding, we actually do, we're quite professional, or come and see us and we'll give you our cards. But thank you very much, we really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk and meet a lot of you, so ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa, kia Toi Te Ora Public Health, tēnā koutou.